The Battle of the Burning Veil began at dawn by the ancient Silvari calendar, though dawn meant nothing in the endless darkness of space, where two forces prepared to decide the fate of a galaxy. Commander Unipark stood at the tactical center of the combined fleet and watched the swarm approach on displays that could not fully capture the horror of what was coming. Billions of organisms moved as one, a wall of flesh and fury that stretched across light years of void. And at the heart of that living wave pulsed the consciousness of the Swarm Queen herself, an intelligence that had ruled the darkness for 10,000 years and had never known defeat. All fleet commanders, Una announced through the Coalition channel. This is Commander Park, assuming tactical coordination. You have all received your assignments, and you know what is expected. Today, we do not fight to survive. We fight to show the swarm what it means to face a galaxy that refuses to die. High Admiral Kethvorn stood beside her, his crystalline form resonating with frequencies that indicated both fear and determination. I never imagined I would fight alongside humans, he admitted. I thought your species too primitive to contribute anything meaningful to galactic defense. And now, Una asked, now I understand why your species survived your death world, Kethvorn replied. You are not primitive at all. You are simply shaped by different pressures than any species we have ever encountered. The swarm reached engagement range and attacked organic projectiles filled the void like a storm of living death. Each one seeking Covenant vessels with the hunger of creatures bred for nothing but destruction. And the combined fleet responded with a barrage of fire that lit up the darkness brighter than any star. But this time, the Covenant forces did not fight the way they had been trained. They fought like humans, Captain. Beat Junho led the spearhead assault aboard a new destroyer christened the Unbroken, driving into the heart of the swarm formation with the same reckless courage that had made the original human sector engagement legendary. Target nerve clusters, he commanded. Make them feel every shot. The human vessels wove through the swarm fleet like predators hunting prey, and the aliens who had joined the assault followed their lead, abandoning 10,000 years of cautious tactical doctrine to embrace the doctrine of terrible cost. The Swarm Queen felt her children screaming. She felt the pain flooding through her network like fire, spreading through dry wood. And she pushed her forces forward with greater fury because she understood now what the humans were doing. They were teaching her, children, that victory had a price. Concentrate. Fire on the human vessels, the Queen commanded. Through the collective consciousness, eliminate the source of the aberrant strategy. The swarm surged toward the human ships with renewed intensity, and Junho saw his tactical display fill with targeting solutions as every organism in range focused on destroying the Unbroken captain. Lieutenant Minjae shouted from the weapons station. We have incoming from all vectors. There is no escape route. Then we do not escape, Junho replied. We endure. The Unbroken took hit after hit, its hull breaching in a dozen places as organic projectiles tore through armor plating. And Junho held his ship together through sheer will as his crew fought with everything they had. When the engines finally failed and the reactor began its terminal countdown, Junho gave his final order. All hands abandon ship, he commanded. Get to the escape pods and survive. That is an order. The crew evacuated as the Unbroken died around them, and Junho stayed at his station until the last pod launched, before he finally allowed himself to be pulled into an emergency capsule. The swarm destroyed the Unbroken and turned to consume the escape pods. But other human vessels were already moving to intercept, already fighting to protect their fallen comrades. The Queen watched and felt something she had never experienced in 10,000 years of conquest. She felt frustration. These humans would not stop. They kept fighting when they should have surrendered, kept protecting each other when they should have fled. kept causing pain when they should have been consumed. And for the first time in her ancient existence, the Queen began to wonder if victory was worth what it was costing. She reached out with her consciousness and touched the mind of the nearest human, a pilot in a damaged fighter who was still firing at swarm vessels, despite having no hope of survival. What she found there made her recoil. She found grief for fallen friends and love for distant family, and rage at an enemy that threatened. Everything precious, and beneath all of that she found something that had no equivalent in the swarm's experience. She found an absolute refusal to give up, not hope, because the human knew he was going to die, not courage, because he was terrified, just a simple stubborn determination to keep fighting until his body physically could not continue, to make every second cost the enemy something, to refuse to be nothing even in the face of annihilation. The Queen withdrew from that mind and felt something change within her own vast consciousness. She felt doubt. Commander Una Park saw the moment the swarm's assault pattern changed, saw the hesitation ripple through billions of organisms as their Queen processed something she had never encountered before. Now, Una commanded. All forces push forward now. The combined fleet surged into the gap created by the swarm's moment of uncertainty, and the battle reached its climax as every ship in the coalition threw everything it had at the enemy. Hours passed. Ships died on both sides. The burning Vale earned its name as the wreckage of thousands of vessels filled the void with fire and debris. And then the swarm stopped attacking. Una watched in disbelief as the organic fleet pulled back, not retreating in panic but withdrawing with deliberate purpose, creating distance between itself and the battered remnants of the Covenant forces. What is happening? Keth Voren demanded. A new signal appeared on the communication array, a biological transmission pattern the translation system struggled to decode. When the meaning became clear, Una had to sit down. The swarm is requesting a ceasefire, she whispered. That is impossible, Arnek said. The swarm does not negotiate. It has never negotiated in 10,000 years. It is negotiating now. The Queen's message was simple. She had consumed 17 civilizations over 10 millennia, and not one of them had ever hurt her the way humanity had hurt her today. Not one had ever made her children feel fear. Not one had ever made victory cost more than defeat. She was proposing something unprecedented: peace. 6 months later, Commander Una Park stood before the Galactic Covenant Council and delivered her final report on the war that had changed everything. The endless swarm has withdrawn from Covenant space, she announced. Per the terms of the treaty, they have agreed to seek sustenance from uninhabited systems and to never again attack any species protected by the Covenant. High Admiral Keth Voren rose from his seat. Let the record show that humanity accomplished something no species in this galaxy ever believed possible, he declared. They did not defeat the swarm through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They defeated the swarm by being too stubborn to die and too spiteful to make victory worthwhile. The council erupted in sounds of agreement from a dozen different species later. Keth Voren found Una standing alone at an observation window, watching the stars where the swarm had once threatened everything. I have a question for you, the Admiral said. Ask, what will the galaxy do now that it knows what humans are capable of? Una smiled, and it was the same expression she had worn when she first proposed teaching the swarm to fear. They will add a new doctrine to their war colleges, she said. Never make humanity desperate, because desperate humans do not surrender. What do? They adapt, Una replied. They endure, and they make you remember every wound you ever gave them. Outside the window, the stars burned cold and eternal, and somewhere in the darkness, a species that had consumed civilizations for 10,000 years carried new memories in its collective consciousness, memories of pain, memories of doubt, and Memories of a small, soft species. From a death world that had looked at an impossible enemy and said no. The universe would never forget what humanity had taught it that day. Some prey fights back. 3 weeks had passed since the battle of the human sector, and the galaxy had begun to notice something strange. The endless swarm was avoiding human ships. Dr. Shin Yunji sat in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Perseverance and studied the behavioral data that poured in from observation posts across the Varith system. And what she saw confirmed everything Commander Park had predicted. The swarm was afraid. The pattern is unmistakable. Yunji explained to the assembled officers in the briefing room, her display showing heat maps of swarm movement across the theater of operations. In every engagement over the past 21 days, swarm forces have diverted around human-defended positions, even when direct assault would have been tactically advantageous. Fleet tactician Ornex studied the data with the analytical precision of his species. But even his logical mind struggled to accept what the evidence suggested. "You are saying that the collective has developed an aversion response," he said. "But the swarm does not experience fear. It is a hive mind operating on pure survival mathematics." "That is what we all believed," Yunji replied. "But we were wrong." She changed the display to show neural activity patterns captured from swarm organisms that had been disabled and studied after the initial engagement. The swarm processes information through a distributed network of biological signals, she continued. Every organism in the collective shares data instantaneously across vast distances. And that includes sensory data, which means that when we cause pain to swarm vessels in the human sector engagement, every organism in the collective felt it. High Admiral Kethvorn leaned forward in his seat. "You are saying we traumatized the entire swarm," he said. "I am saying that humanity taught the swarm something it had never learned in 10,000 years of consuming civilizations." Yunji answered. "We taught it that some prey fights back hard enough to leave scars." Commander Yuna. Park stood at the edge of the briefing room and listened to the report with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. Because she knew that wounded predators were dangerous. And a wounded predator the size of a galactic extinction event was more dangerous still. "The swarm will not avoid us forever," she said. "It is a survival-oriented intelligence, and right now it is processing what happened and developing countermeasures. We need to maintain pressure before it adapts. Other Covenant species have already requested human tactical advisors," Kethvorn reported. "The Veluxi Collective and the Thornaki Empire have both transmitted formal requests for human assistance in their defensive operations." "Then we should send them," Yuna said. "Spread our doctrine across every fleet in the Covenant. Teach them what we know about fighting without hope and surviving anyway." Arnex rose from his seat and approached Yuna with an expression that was difficult to read on his insectoid features. "Commander Park," he said, "I have studied your species for the past 3 weeks. I have analyzed your history and your psychology and your tactical doctrine, and I find myself unable to understand something fundamental." "What is that?" "Tactician. How do you live with it?" Arnex asked. And there was something almost plaintive in his voice. "How do you carry such darkness in your history and still function, still build civilizations, still reach for the stars?" Yuna considered the question carefully before answering. "We do not forget," she said finally. "Every generation of humans inherits the trauma of the generations before. We carry our wars and our plagues and our failures in our collective memory, and we transform that weight into strength." "That sounds like madness." "Perhaps it is," Yuna admitted. "But it is a madness that has kept us alive for 200,000 years on a world that tried to kill us every single day. And it is a madness that will keep us fighting long after any rational species would have surrendered." The briefing room doors opened. An ambassador, Seojin, entered with an expression that made every officer in the room stand at attention. "We have received transmission from the swarm," he announced. The room fell absolutely silent in 10,000 years of warfare. The endless swarm had never communicated with any species it was consuming. It simply attacked and devoured and moved on, treating its prey as nothing more than resources to be processed. "What does it say?" Keth Vorn asked. Sagin activated his personal display and projected the message for everyone to see. It was not words in any traditional sense, but rather a pattern of biological signals that the Covenant's translation systems had struggled to interpret. And when the meaning became clear, Una felt her blood run cold. "It says target identified," Seojin translated. "It says source of aberrant pain response located. It says priority elimination authorized. The swarm is coming for us specifically." Yunji realized, "Not just for us," Una said. And she pulled up the tactical display to show the massive concentration of swarm forces gathering at the edge of the system. "It is bringing everything." The display showed a fleet larger than anything the Covenant had ever faced. Billions of organisms consolidating into a single overwhelming force. And at its center pulsed the unmistakable signature of a swarm queen, the collective intelligence that commanded the entire invasion had committed itself to this battle personally. The queen wants to eliminate the source of the fear response before it spreads further, Orinex analyzed. "This is a logical survival decision. This is also our opportunity," Una countered. And her voice carried a confidence that made the alien officers stare at her. "The swarm has never concentrated its forces like this before. It has never made itself vulnerable by putting everything in one place. And that means we have a chance to end this war once and for all. Or die trying," Kethvorin said. "Yes," Una agreed. "But humans have been dying trying for as long as we have existed. And we are still here." She turned to address the assembled officers of every species in the Covenant. "Contact every fleet in range," she commanded. "Tell them that the largest battle in galactic history is about to begin. And tell them that humanity will be leading the charge." The officers moved to carry out her orders. And Kethvorn approached her with an expression that she had learned to recognize. "As Selvari concerned, are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. Una looked out at the stars where the swarm was gathering its forces, where a queen who had consumed 17 civilizations was preparing to personally destroy the species that had taught her children to fear. "I am certain of nothing," she admitted. "But I know that running will not save us. And I know that humanity has never won a war by being careful." She turned to face the High Admiral directly. "They learned to fear us," she said. "Now we teach them to respect us." Captain Baek Junho stood on the bridge of the destroyer, Defiance, and watched the swarm approach through the void. The organic ships of the enemy filled the sensor display like a spreading infection. Thousands of pulsing biological vessels moving in perfect coordination toward the human defensive position. And any other commander in the galaxy would have ordered a retreat at the sight of such overwhelming force. Junho smiled. "All hands," he announced through the ship-wide communication system. "This is the captain speaking. In approximately 15 minutes, we will engage the largest hostile fleet any human crew has ever faced. And I want you all to know that I have complete confidence in our ability to make them regret ever coming here." Beside him, Lieutenant Haminje checked the weapon systems for the 4th time in the past hour. "Captain," Minje said, "the targeting solutions are locked in. But I have to ask, are we really going to do this?" "Do what?" "Lieutenant, fight them without trying to win." Junho turned to face his young weapons officer, and his expression softened into something that was almost paternal. "Let me tell you something my grandmother told me when I was a boy," he said. "She survived the soul collapse when she was younger than you are now. And she spent 3 weeks trapped in the ruins of a building with no food and no water and no hope of rescue. "How did she survive?" Minje asked. "She said she survived because she made a promise to herself." Junho replied, "She promised that if she was going to die, she would make the universe remember that she existed. She would scratch her name into the walls and leave a mark that would last 1,000 years. And that stubborn refusal to be forgotten kept her alive long enough for the rescue teams to find her." He gestured toward the approaching swarm fleet. "That is what we are doing today. Lieutenant, we are scratching our names into the hide of something that has consumed 17 civilizations. And when this is over, the swarm will remember that humanity was here." The Defiance was not alone in the void. 12 human destroyers and 37 smaller vessels held formation in the sector that High Admiral Kethvorin had designated for the human engagement, their crews running final checks on weapons and engines and preparing themselves for what was about to come. Commander Yuna Park's voice came through the fleet communication channel. "All human vessels. This is Commander Park aboard the Covenant flagship. You have your orders, and you know what is expected of you. Remember that we are not fighting to destroy the enemy today. We are fighting to teach them something they have never learned." "What are we teaching them?" "Commander," someone asked over the channel. "Pain," Yuna answered, "and fear. And the knowledge that some species do not break no matter how hard you push them." The swarm fleet reached optimal engagement range and began its assault. Organic projectiles launched from the biological vessels like seeds scattered by some terrible wind. Each one a living weapon designed to penetrate hull plating and consume the ship from within. And the human fleet responded with a barrage, a fire that lit up the darkness of space. But the humans did not fire at vital systems. They did not target engines or command centers or reproductive organs. They fired at nerve clusters, the swarm's organic. Ships were living creatures in their own right, connected to the collective intelligence through a network of biological signals. And when the human weapons struck their nerve clusters, something happened that the swarm had never experienced in 10,000 years of warfare. The ships felt agony aboard the Eternal Vigilance. High Admiral Kethvorin watched the engagement through tactical displays that tracked every weapon impact and every ship movement. And what he saw made his crystalline form vibrate with emotions he could not identify. "They are not trying to destroy the swarm vessels," Fleet Tactician Oranax observed, his mandibles clicking rapidly as he processed the data. "They are deliberately causing maximum pain while minimizing lethal damage." "Why?" Kethvorin asked. Yuna stood beside them with her arms crossed over her chest. "Because dead enemies feel nothing," she said, "but wounded enemies remember." The Swarm Collective processed the incoming data from its frontline vessels and felt something it had never experienced before: hesitation. The pain signals flooding through the network were unlike anything in the Collective's memory banks. Not the clean termination of destroyed vessels, but the sustained screaming of organisms in agony. And for the first time in recorded history, the swarm's attack formation wavered. Captain Junho saw the moment of confusion and seized it. "All vessels," he commanded. "Execute maneuver pattern Grandmother. I say again, Grandmother." The human fleet surged forward in a formation that made no tactical sense to any species that prioritized survival. 12 destroyers driving directly into the heart of the swarm formation, while smaller vessels flanked and harassed and drew attention in every direction. The Defiance led the charge, and Junho pushed his ship's engines beyond their rated capacity as he drove toward the largest swarm vessel in range. "Captain," Minje shouted, "we are on collision course." "I know. We will be destroyed." "Not yet." The swarm vessel loomed larger and larger on the forward display, its organic hull pulsing with what might have been fear as it registered the approaching human ship. And at the last possible moment, Junho wrenched the controls and sent the Defiance spinning away in a maneuver that should have torn the ship apart. The swarm vessel flinched, an organism the size of a small moon. A creature that had consumed entire fleets without pause. Actually flinched away from a single human destroyer, and the swarm collective saw it happen. The collective saw one of its children show fear of prey. And something in the vast intelligence that had ruled the void for 10,000 years began to change. The battle continued for 6 more hours. The humans lost 7 vessels and 214 crew members. And they made the swarm pay for every single one when it was over. When the swarm finally pulled back from the human sector to regroup and reassess, HFY stood at the observation window and watched the organic fleet retreat into the darkness. "I have commanded 60 campaigns across this galaxy," he said quietly, "and I have never seen anything like what I witnessed today." "What did you see?" "Admiral," Una asked. HFY turned to face her, and his crystalline features shifted into an expression that she recognized despite the alien biology. It was respect. "I saw your people make monsters remember that they can bleed," he said. "What do you call this strategy?" Una looked out at the retreating swarm, and somewhere in the void she could feel the collective intelligence processing what had happened, learning from it, and beginning to fear. "We call it making them remember," she said. "And this is only the beginning." The War Council chamber aboard the flagship Eternal Vigilance fell silent as Commander Una Park finished speaking. 12 species sat represented at the curved table that dominated the room, each one a member of the Galactic Covenant, each one facing the extinction of everything they had ever built. And not one of them knew how to respond to what this human had just proposed. High Admiral HFY broke the silence first. "You are asking us to abandon 10,000 years of military doctrine," he said. "Every civilization in this room has built their defensive strategies around the principle of decisive victory. And you suggest we throw that away. I suggest you recognize that decisive victory is impossible against the endless swarm." Una replied, and she stood at the center of the council chamber without any sign of intimidation, despite being surrounded by beings who towered over her. "The swarm does not think like you do. It does not fear defeat because it has never experienced defeat. It simply consumes and grows and moves on to the next target." Ambassador Choi Sajin rose from his seat in the human delegation section, his gray hair and lined face marking him as one of the elder statesmen of Earth's diplomatic corps. "If I may address the council," he said, and his voice carried the calm authority of someone who had negotiated peace treaties in rooms far more hostile than this one. HFY gestured for him to continue. "My colleague has explained what we call the doctrine of terrible cost," Seojin said. "But perhaps I can provide context that will help you understand why humanity developed such a philosophy." He walked to the central display and pulled up an image of Earth rotating slowly in the void. "On our world," he continued, "humans were never the apex predators. We were not the strongest or the fastest or the most deadly creatures in our environment. We survived by learning to work together and by developing one trait that no other species on our planet possessed." "What trait?" Fleet Tactician Ornax asked. "Spite," Seojin answered. The word did not translate well into most galactic languages, and several representatives requested clarification through their communication devices. "Spite is the willingness to harm yourself in order to harm your enemy more," Seojin explained. "It is the refusal to surrender, even when surrender would be the logical choice. It is the decision to make your attacker pay such a terrible price that they will never forget what it cost them to fight you." A representative from the Veluxi Collective, a species of gas-dwelling beings who communicated through color changes in their membrane, pulsed a deep red that indicated horror. "This is madness," the Veluxi said through their translator. "No rational species would embrace self-destruction as a strategy. And yet here we are," Una said. "The only species in this room that did not achieve spaceflight through peaceful cooperation." the only species that nearly destroyed itself multiple times before reaching the stars, and the only species that has ever looked at an impossible enemy and asked not how do we win, but how do we make them hurt. She brought up more data on the display, historical records that made several council members turn away in disgust. Humanity has faced extinction-level events on several occasions in our recorded history, Una continued. Plagues that killed half our population, wars that burned entire continents, famines that lasted generations. And every single time we survived, not because we found a way to win, but because we refused to let our enemies win either. This is different. Keth Vorn insisted. The swarm is not a disease or a natural disaster. It is an intelligent collective that adapts to every strategy we deploy. Then we will give it something to adapt to, Una said. We will give it pain. She changed the display to show the organic ships of the swarm. Their pulsing biological hulls regenerating damage faster than Covenant weapons could inflict it. The swarm's greatest strength is its ability to recover from any attack, she said. But that recovery requires energy and resources, and every moment the swarm spends healing is a moment it cannot spend advancing. You propose a war of attrition, Arnak said, and his mandibles clicked as he processed the implications. But we do not have the numbers to sustain such a conflict. You do not need numbers, Una replied. You need will. And humans have survived for 200,000 years on a death world by having more will than anything that tried to kill us. Ambassador Seojin stepped forward again. What my colleague is trying to say is that humanity offers you something no other species in this galaxy can provide. He said, we offer you the experience of being prey that learned to make predators afraid. The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations as representatives debated among themselves in a dozen different languages. Keth Vorn watched the human commander standing alone at the center of the room, and he saw in her posture something that he had never observed in any species he had encountered across 60 campaigns. He saw someone who had already accepted death and moved past it. High Admiral, Una said, and her voice cut through the noise of the council. I am not asking you to believe in our strategy. I am asking you to give us one chance to prove it. And if you fail, then you will have lost a single engagement in a war you were already losing, she answered. But if we succeed, the swarm will learn something that will change everything. What will they learn? Keth Vorn asked. Echoing the question Ornex had posed earlier, Una met his crystalline eyes without flinching. They will learn that some prey bites back, she said, and they will remember every wound we give them. In the distance beyond the flagship's hull, the swarm continued its patient consumption of the Covenant defensive line. Its collective intelligence, processing tactical data and adjusting attack patterns. With the efficiency of a species that had never known failure, the collective registered the human vessels, moving into formation in a sector of space that had been designated as low priority. The humans were irrelevant. They were soft and small and had no significant military technology. They were not worth the attention of a species that had consumed 17 civilizations. The swarm would learn how wrong it was very soon. High Admiral Keth Vorn stood before the observation window of his flagship and watched another cruiser break apart in the darkness of space, its crystal hull shattering like glass thrown against stone. And he felt something he had not experienced in 60 campaigns of warfare across the galaxy. He felt despair. The endless swarm had come to Vareth Prime 3 months ago, and in that time they had reduced the greatest defensive fleet in the Galactic Covenant to scattered remnants fighting for survival, and nothing the Admiral did could slow their advance, and nothing his tacticians planned could pierce their endless numbers. High Admiral, Fleet Tactician Arnak said from behind him, the insectoid officer's mandibles clicking with each word. The latest simulation results have arrived. Kethvoran did not turn around because he already knew what those results would show. "Tell me," he said, 0% survival probability across all projected scenarios. Arnex reported, and there was no emotion in his voice because the Morthani species did not process information through feelings the way other races did. The swarm's new organic vessels regenerate faster than our weapons can inflict damage, and their numbers increase with each engagement as they consume our fallen ships for biological material. The Admiral's crystalline body hummed with a frequency that indicated resignation, and he began composing the evacuation orders in his mind, calculating how many civilian transports could escape before the swarm overwhelmed the final defensive line. A chime sounded at the chamber door. "Enter," Kethvoran commanded. The door slid open and revealed a creature that looked almost fragile compared to the towering crystalline Selvari, or the armored Morthani. A small being with soft skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. Wearing a uniform that bore the simple insignia of the United Earth Coalition Commander Una, Park stepped into the war room and saluted in the human fashion, her hand rising to her forehead and then dropping to her side. "High Admiral," she said. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have completed my analysis of the battle data from the past 72 hours. Kethvoran regarded the human with something between curiosity and pity, because humanity had only achieved faster than light travel 2 centuries ago, and they were still considered newcomers to galactic civilization, primitives who had barely escaped their birth world before they would have destroyed themselves with their own weapons. The Covenant had allowed a small human delegation to observe the defense of Vareth Prime as a gesture of inclusion, never expecting that these soft creatures would offer anything of value. "Your analysis is noted, Commander," the Admiral said, and he returned his attention to the burning sky. "But I fear there is little your observations can contribute to our situation." Una did not leave. She stood in the doorway and watched the Admiral with eyes that held no fear despite the destruction unfolding before them. And Arnex found himself studying her with growing interest because the Morthani were excellent readers of biological stress responses, and this human displayed almost none. "With respect, High Admiral," Una said, "I believe there is something you have not considered." "And what would that be?" "You are trying to win," Una replied. Kethvoran turned to face her fully, his crystalline features shifting into an expression of confusion that was universal across species. "Of course we are trying to win," he said. "What else would we be trying to do?" Una stepped further into the room and approached the tactical display that floated in the center of the chamber, showing the positions of Covenant forces and the overwhelming mass of swarm organisms that surrounded them. "The endless swarm has consumed 17 civilizations over 10,000 years, she said. Every single one of those civilizations tried to win against them, and every single one failed because the swarm cannot be defeated through conventional victory." "Then you suggest we surrender," Arnex said, and his mandibles clicked with what might have been contempt. "No," Una answered, and something in her voice made both aliens pause. "I suggest we do something the swarm has never encountered before." She touched the tactical display and brought up a historical file that neither Kethvoran nor Arnex recognized. Images and data from a world they had never visited. A small blue planet spinning alone in an unremarkable solar system. "This is Earth," Una said. "My home world, and it is what the galactic community classifies as a death world. A planet where the conditions are so hostile that intelligent life should never have evolved. We are aware of your planet's classification," Kethvoran said. "It is considered remarkable that your species survived at all. Do you know why we survived?" "High Admiral." The Admiral did not answer. "We survived because we learned something that no other species in this galaxy has ever needed to learn," Una continued, and she pulled up more images on the display. Images of human history that made Ornex take an involuntary step backward. We learned that sometimes you cannot win. And sometimes survival means making your enemy bleed so badly that they decide you are not worth the cost. The display showed wars and plagues and famines. Showed humans killing each other and humans saving each other. Showed cities burning and cities rising from ashes. Showed a species that had faced extinction over and over and refused to accept it. We call it the doctrine of terrible cost, Una said. And it is the reason humanity still exists. Kath Voren stared at the display with growing unease because the Selvari were a peaceful species who had achieved spaceflight through cooperation and harmony. And the violence in human history was beyond anything he had ever imagined. You suggest we deliberately sacrifice our forces to inflict damage, he said. That is not strategy, that is madness. It is survival, Una replied. And it is the one thing the swarm has never faced. She turned to face the Admiral directly. And in her eyes he saw something that made his crystalline form vibrate with an emotion he could not name. Give me command of a single engagement, Una said. Let my people show you what it means to fight without hope of victory. And I promise you that the swarm will learn something today that they have never learned in 10,000 years of conquest. What will they learn? Ornex asked. Una smiled. And it was not a kind expression. They will learn to be afraid. Outside the observation window, the swarm's organic ships pulsed and shifted as they prepared for another assault. Their collective intelligence directing millions of organisms toward the weakening Covenant defensive line. The swarm detected unusual movement in the human fleet sector. Small ships repositioning in patterns that did not match any known tactical formation. The collective dismissed it as irrelevant. The humans were primitives after all. Barely worth noticing, certainly not worth fearing. That was about to change.